Hello and welcome to Every Rockie Ever, a Rocky Mountain rooftop podcast, the Colorado Rockies affiliate of the Fans First Sports Network. I'm Skyler Timmins. That's my brother Dustin. And as we journey forth here through the entirety of the Colorado Rockies, and what better guy to start with than the big cat himself, native out of Venezuela, one Andres Galarraga. Dustin, this is probably your first baseman more so than it is mine, just purely for the age that he played in.
Oh man, the big cat was the guy that, made such a huge impact. He's a super good guy on the field, was amazing. Iconic batting stance with the Rockies, and man, he's a great Rocky to start this off with.
Yeah, when we were kind of figuring out, well, who would be the first one, the big cat seemed like an obvious pick. Not only is he the very first Colorado Rocky, our first superstar, ton of first for the organization, but he's also just that big fan favorite. Like you mentioned, always a big smile, positive guy. You're hard-pressed to find anybody that's followed the Rockies to not have something good to say about Andres Galarraga. So it's going to be exciting to kind of dive into his career here. But first, we're not just going to we'll focus primarily on his Rockies career, but we'll do a quick overview of his career, of where he played. He played for a long time in the big leagues. And so he's got that storied career. We know him for his time in Colorado, but that's still just a drop in the bucket over the course of his entire career. And Dustin, I'll let you kind of do his rundown here over on his baseball reference page. Great resource that we can use to look back in time. But tell me about Galarraga. Tell us about Galarraga.
Well, Andres Galarraga was born June 18th, 1961 in Caracas, Venezuela. And he made his major league debut. He was signed by the Expos and made his major league debut August 23rd in 1985 when he was 24 years old. And he played with Montreal from 1985 all the way to 1991. Then he went over to St. Louis and didn't have that great of a season. He was released and was like you said earlier, the first Rockies free agent, the first Rockie ever. And he was the Rockies starting first baseman for 5 consecutive seasons. All 5 seasons he was with Colorado. And 1998, he moved on to play for Atlanta, and he played for them for a couple of seasons. Went over to the Texas Rangers, over to the San Francisco Giants, back to Montreal, back to the Giants, and had his last major league action with Anaheim in 2004. In 2005, he went to spring training with the Mets, but decided to retire before spring training ended. So, that was 19 years of major league service. He was, impactful everywhere that he went. But that's what he had. He was a 5-time All-Star, a 2-time Gold Glove winner, 2-time Silver Slugger, and won that batting title in 1993 with the Rockies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you think of the damage that he did in Colorado, and that's probably where he's best known for. And we'll get into that. But it's just cool to see of that entire career, a guy playing for nearly 20 years, where that's not happening as much anymore, especially these days, the way the game's played, where guys are lucky if they get 15 years.
Yeah, and that's the thing, 19, and he was a huge guy.
Mm-hmm.
He was 6'3", 235 pounds, but he was nimble. And you look at his stats in that career, and with the health issue, he suffered a ton of injuries throughout his career. he had the fight with cancer in 1998, or the 1999 season, and he's just a great a great player, and it's crazy to see all those different places that he was at. His stats, and he was our guy. One of
Mhm.
those founding members of the Rockies, the Blake Street Bombers,
Mhm.
and it's just like I said, just an awesome guy.
Yeah, and kind of some of these career totals. He's at 19 years in the big leagues, finished with a slash line, a 288 batting average, 347 on base, 499 slugging, ended his career with 399 home runs and with 2,333 hits in his career. And for some of you nerds out there that like the more advanced stats, an OPS plus of 119. So 19% better than in the entire history of Major League Baseball. He is 19 points better than the average big leaguer, which pretty good over his career, and something I'm sure he's also proud of. 128 stolen bases in 19 years. So good for the big cat. And we don't have advanced stats for his fielding, but as you can tell, gold gloves are usually a pretty good indicator of how a guy does defensively. And so it's not just with the Rockies, but over the course of his career, he had some ups and downs, but an overall really solid player no matter where he went. But as we know, why we're here to talk about every Rocky ever. I figure it's best that we spend most of our time with what he did in Colorado. It's like you said, 1993 to 1997, his age 32 to age 36. So he was not a young man playing in Colorado.
No, and those 5 solid years, and it was new for everybody playing at altitude, playing at the old Mile High Stadium, and and going through. He had a really tough season, that '92 season in St. Louis. Luckily, he had Don Baylor as his hitting coach. Tweaked some things in his batting stance so he'd keep both eyes on the pitcher and then get that big leg kick into the pitch. And that was just a perfect setup to have success in Colorado, especially in those slugfest days
Mm-hmm.
when they're scoring 15 runs a game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Rockies weren't winning games because of their pitching in those
Oof.
early days. And I like that you bring in Don Baylor, the Rockies' very first manager, who was instrumental in, but just had this weird touch with all these Blake Street Bombers, those guys in the early days. Don Baylor happened to be the hitting coach down in St. Louis in 1992, and that's where he meets Galarraga, who at that point was really struggling. He had some of those down years. That last year in Montreal in 91, he's struggling, injuries and everything. He was struggling with just 10 home runs in 347 plate appearances in 1992, about the halfway through the season. And he was, this is Manny Rendawa, the writer for MLB.com, in his book, Blake Street Bombers, brings up that Don Baylor finds him under the bleachers at Old Bush Stadium in St. Louis, and Galarraga's just in tears because he figures his career's over because he's just been struggling so much and nothing's going right for him. And Galarraga Don Baylor comes and kind of puts his arm around him and kind of consoles him. And what Don Baylor says, what he told him is, I told him the same thing everybody else had been telling him. He was just ready to listen. Opened up his stance, that iconic stance that everybody came to know and love in Colorado. Don Baylor had given him that, helped him figure that out down in St. Louis. Goes on a tear in the second half of the season. His final, what was it? After hitting a buck 86 with 2 home runs and 165 plate appearances prior to the All Star break, he hit nearly 300 and slugged 497 with 8 home runs in second half. So it just completely altered his swing. Uh, Dustin is someone who was able to witness it in person, I guess in person and in clips and everything. What was so unique or interesting about Galarraga's batting stance, I guess, that made it so endearing or unique to people?
Well, I think because it was for me, his legs were so far apart. With his back leg was all the way out there, and he was already a big guy. 6'3", 235. He's huge and intimidating. And when you're seeing his whole body staring back at you as a pitcher, you know, looking at the old clips of how hard the ball would come off his bat,
Mhm.
it was scary. And I think that goes back, even when he was a kid in Venezuela, that's what caught a lot of people's eyes, especially Felipe Alou down in Venezuela saw this kid just ripping the ball
This chubby
and
16-year-old.
had so much strength. And so it was just something that for me it was out of the ordinary, that super exaggerated wide stance and just that power going through the baseball.
Mhm.
And I don't think there's any those Colorado fans back in the day that didn't try to do that Andres Galarraga batting stance and try
Yeah,
to recreate what he could do.
yeah, because pretty standard. You stand square in the box and kind of look through one eye, and Don Baylor opens it up. Who's because he's right eye dominant. When you're batting right-handed, you're looking with that left eye mostly. Open up the stance so you're facing the pitcher. Use both eyes. Makes you a better hitter. And it panned out pretty good in the next year when they signed him for a measly $600,000 for a 1 year contract heading into the 1993 season with some incentives. It probably goes down as one of the best free agent signings in Rockies history.
It has to, way better than some of the Rockies we'll get into on this. Those contracts were horrible, but this was an absolute steal.
Hmm. Absolutely. And so that first season, I think we can focus on primarily here, that 1993 season, the pandemonium, the excitement of Rockies baseball. Denver finally has a team. Everybody has a local team to root for, breaking attendance records, exciting things. And it helps to have a superstar to really kick things off in that first season in Andres Galarraga, who said in that first season, a lot of firsts that come through for the team. Where he played in 120 games. So still working on some health, everything like that would hinder him throughout his career. That first season, all star, or first all star, 120 games, led the league in batting average with a 370. His highest before that was a 305 in 1987 when he was 26 years old. He was taking full advantage of playing in Colorado.
Oh, most definitely. And he compiled 56 multi-hit games to lead the league that year.
Mhm.
And it was just 370. Think about that. And you think of those times, later on, that first baseman that came up after him, where it was with Todd Helton, it was always a thought of, well, he could hit 400. Would he be a guy to do that? But then, it's just crazy with an expansion team, new place, and some, what people thought maybe was a washed up player, and he hits 370.
Mhm.
And it was just crazy. 22 home runs, 98 RBIs, 71 runs, 35 doubles, 4 triples. He had a little speed in him, and that 602 slugging percentage,
Mhm.
which that was second in the league. And who was right behind him? Tony Gwynn.
Mhm.
You mentioned along with Tony Gwynn. Yeah, you were doing things the right way.
Yeah. Just a guy that was getting on base. I was looking at his stats here, didn't realize he had a pretty good season. Didn't strike out much in 93. He was walking, not much, but 24 walks. But you'll take the hitting 370 because he's hitting the ball out of the park, hitting it anywhere and everywhere. in that first season. I believe he won the Comeback Player of the Year award that year as well. First of two that he would have in his career. And it probably was exciting. What a treat for Colorado fans. I'm sure in that first season, you've got this star player immediately who's just making a huge impact for your club.
Oh, definitely, and especially he got the first Rockies hit against the Mets against Dwight Gooden, and so that I think that's one of those moments um, that I do remember. Trying to get into the Rockies and all this stuff. Yeah, they didn't do too well, but he did have that. He was that first rock, the first of a lot of things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's nice is that then through that 5 years, he was helping build that basis of what the Rockies, could be when an offense is rolling. And a rare instance of you have a slugger who is also providing some high quality Gold Glove defense at first base. Uh, Even with the injuries and everything, wasn't hindering him on defense. But it was nice to just have a cornerstone there, especially for an expansion team trying to find its footing. You've got a guy like Galarraga there to help lead the way, anchor an infield. That was, that middle infield probably was rotating a bit. His buddy Vinny over at third base. Nice and solid to have the big cat handling the other hot corner.
Oh, definitely, and that's something too. We want to talk about his Rockies history, but everybody's like, big cat. Yeah, he's a big guy, but um, I guess that came out when he was in playing rookie ball in Calgary, and
Mm,
his manager at the time, Bob Bailey, just said, this kid's got cat-like reflexes and this agility, and so that's where Big Cat. And I think that's part of his lure. His lore is that nickname. The
mhm,
first our first player, and that's one of those things. He was marketable in that way, and and he played with a lot of good info. Walter Weiss and Vinny over at third base. He Galarraga anchored a lot of those decent, pretty decent infields.
mhm. And you could see his influence perhaps then on his successor in Todd Helton, who will like go down as one of the best first basemen in the history of baseball. Defensively, that first base defense, yes, he had the slugging he was hitting, that prototypical first baseman power that you expect. Yeah, he was striking out a lot in those over the course of that contract. After that first year, he signs a 4-year contract. Uh, Struck out a lot, was leading the league in strikeouts, but it all evened out. Even it evens out one way or another.
Yes, it did.
You'll take 40 home runs if he's leading the league in strikeouts still, and
Oh
still hitting
yeah,
like 280.
yeah, most definitely. Yeah, myself in my hitting days.
Mm-hmm. Like yeah, in those 5 years, hit under 300 just once, and that's in 1995, their playoff year. So nice and consistent coming at a Galarraga.
Well, even in that '95 season, that's where that '95 season is where a lot of these had, from what I was going through, there was two of those moments, those Galarraga moments that stick out. And the first was in June 25th, 1995, where he hit 3 home runs, 3 consecutive innings. And so that is it tied a major league record. And like you said, that season added 280. So that's still good. 31 homers, 106 RBI, and he was able to be healthy, and that was key in helping the Rockies clinch that first wild card in '95. But speaking of that again of that '95 season, that 3 homer game, and that was against San Diego, and it's cool going back and listening to that. The Padres broadcast, and they were just like, "All right, here it comes again," and just ripping the ball. And then a couple weeks later, July 3rd of '95, he had 6 hits, 6 consecutive at bats against the Astros.
Uh-huh.
And so, that one he had just mashing the ball. And those are in 1995, two of those, career moments that a lot of people remember.
Uh-huh.
And again, those, set Rockies records that later, Charlie Blackmon would go and say, "Hey, I want to be part of that 6 for 6 club too."
Uh-huh.
And, those are in that '95 season, a couple of key moments that I remember.
Uh-huh. And what's cool is when you look back at any of his highlights, just the bat coming off his ball is no, he hit it with some authority. And that's something that sometimes you miss from the more modern day Rockies. Oh, it's cool to see them rip the ball, but just be even before those advanced metrics, StatCast and everything, you could just with the eyeball test, this crack of the bat, you knew that Galarraga was smoking that thing wherever it went.
Oh yeah. And I think that rolls us into the most iconic Galarraga moment was in 1997 on May 31st
Mm-hmm.
at Pro Player Stadium, Kevin Brown, where Andres Galarraga completely unloaded on a baseball that even though we see it on film, it didn't really land. That was an illusion. That ball never landed. Still in orbit. But that was that hit, that grand slam against Kevin Brown. At the time, they said it was 579 feet. They said, "Oh, well, actually, no, it was only 529." But then they brought in the home run tracker, the StatCast,
Mm-hmm.
and said, actually, no, it was probably more 468 feet. But
Well, yeah, it's funny that they pull it back, and then 14 years later, ESPN Home Run Tracker puts it at 468, and then some well time, maybe a decade after that, they take in more of the Statcast, a 3D mathematical model to determine where the home run landed to finally establish it at 524. So it's when you have to bring in when there's so much discrepancies or arguments about how far it actually went, more than likely he blasted that thing farther than they initially thought.
well, that's what they said too in some of the interviews and stuff. They originally put it 580, and they were like, "Wait a minute, that's longer than Mickey Mantle's longest home run. And we can't do that." And they changed. We got all kinds of conspiracy theories now on this, but holy cow, that was an absolute shot.
And
Galarraga.
what makes it even more impressive is that it didn't happen at altitude. No, this
Yeah,
is
exactly. It
down
was
in
in
Miami,
Florida.
down in Florida, and he just blasts it. Yeah, and that, like you said, that's probably his most iconic Rockies moment because when we ask people on Twitter from Every Rockie Ever about what their favorite moment or things about Andres Galarraga, what's the thing that comes up the most? The Grand Slam, the mammoth shot, and that thing just kept flying, and who knows how far it would have went if it hadn't hit anything there in that stadium.
Ooh. Can you imagine if he had hit that ball at Coors Field?
Yeah.
He had some monster shots at Coors Field, but that one, oof,
Mm-hmm. That one would have, like you said, left orbit or still floating somewhere over Wyoming.
yeesh.
Yeah, and a mammoth shot, and I think that's what people remember the most is the home runs. No, remember the Blake Street Bombers, tons of iconic home runs, but he was a guy that was slugging, and we led the league in home runs with 47 in 1996. Oh, that's still in that top five or so of single season for the Rockies. Still nobody's ever hit 50 home runs, which is still an incredible stat to me with Colorado. But he led the league, 150 RBI. Oh, those slugfests with Coors Field. Only then in those 90s era baseball could you have guys getting 150, 140 RBI to lead the league.
Yeah, man. That's those looking at these stats, you're just like, we haven't had that kind of production forever, it seems now.
Mm-hmm.
And after the he played till that 97 season, because then it was time Todd Helton was just knocking down the door.
Mm-hmm.
And so when Galarraga left, at the time, he was the club's all-time leader in home runs with 172, uh, RBI leader with 579, and then he went on to sign a 3-year contract with the Atlanta Braves. And sadly, his time in the purple pinstripes was over.
Mm-hmm.
But he was just, I think, he was probably one of the best things that could ever happen to that expansion team. And you know everything about him just worked. The nickname, the defense, the offense, that smile, his intensity. He
Mm-hmm.
wasn't afraid to get hit by a pitch, and he was either going to get on first base and try to steal,
Mm-hmm.
or he was going to come at you swinging.
Yeah. And like I read this to you before, but Joe Girardi, because he loved to steal, he's going to steal second base no matter what. And Joe Girardi asked him, Big Cat, what do you think? They can't see you like you're invisible? Because he's going to take off. He had 10 or more stolen bases in a season 6 times, had 18 in 1996. But big guy can move, and he's going to take his chance. And you think as a fan favorite in Colorado, and then you can think of a wider scope of what he means to the Latin player community. They have all those the Venezuelan players. They have their heroes, and Andres Galarraga, especially in Colorado, helps cement himself, and maybe that inspires later Rockies like Carlos Gonzalez, other Hall of Famers like Miguel Cabrera. You know, that impact in Colorado probably reaches much further past that time, those 5 years in purple.
Oh, definitely. And thinking about it, uh, he was, for me, he was the one of the first baseball players that, the Venezuelan players, one of the Latino players that I got to know, and trying to say his name correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I look back, and yeah, that impact that he had in Venezuela. And I was watching an old video when he went back, and he was on a TV show, and it was some guy made this huge painting of Andres, and presented it to him on this TV show. Little kids came up and asked him questions, and the whole time, just a smile on his face. All the interviews I was going through, there were Spanish ones and the English ones, and just always grateful, and that smile. And I think, like you said, uh, that impact that he had on the future generation of Venezuelan ball players, or Latin ball players in general, especially when the Rockies, they did their, in 2013, they had a Andres Galarraga bobblehead. And so he came back to Colorado. He went to Coors Field throughout the first pitch, and seeing him, watching the clips, and he was there with Carlos Gonzalez, caught that first pitch, and
Mm-hmm.
Johnny Herrera, Rafael Betancourt. All those Venezuelan Rockies have had a lot of great Venezuelan ball players for them. And for me as a kid in 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, he was one of my guys.
Mm-hmm.
And it from where where we grew up, and in our experience, that was, we didn't get to interact with that a whole lot. And it's cool for me now, is speak Spanish. I lived in Peru, and I've got friends. I've met tons of people from Spanish speaking countries. And whenever I find my Venezuelan, I always got to talk baseball to them. And Andres Galarraga is always a guy that's brought up, and
Mm,
especially people from Caracas. He's the guy. And
mhm.
then you go to Miguel Cabrera, but Galarraga is one of those first guys, and they're always El Gran Gato, and he's just he was just a really cool guy that
Yeah.
I just always think of him, and it brings a smile to my face because of those moments, and thinking, man, he just I for me, I never think of a bad time with him.
Hmm. Yeah. And he's obviously a fan favorite. Everybody loved him in Colorado. Tons of people still saying that he is their favorite Rocky. Helped made them fall in love with baseball. So uh, cool to see that for somebody that was there living in during that era of Rockies baseball is cool to see. And all in all, when all was said and done, 5 years in Colorado, played in 679 games, ended with a slash line of 316, 367, 577 with a 126 OPS plus in Colorado. Had 172 home runs, 579 RBI, and 843 total hits in his 5 years in Colorado. So, in the pantheon of Rockies, where does he land for you, Dustin?
He's one of those founding fathers, but even though he had those 5 great seasons, we all know who our top guy is at first base.
Mm-hmm.
But he's right underneath him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I wouldn't put him on our Mount Rushmore of the Rockies, but he's right there. He's a huge you know founding block for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He, in a sense, he walks so Todd Helton could run, and but it's more so a sprint because Galarraga was running right before him. Yeah, I think that's right where it is, where he's number one in a lot of people's hearts, but everything else, Todd Helton's probably in front of him in a lot of those aspects. But no, it's just cool learning more about him, and just seeing his impact in his career. I believe now he's just kind of living next to a golf course in Palm Beach with his family or something like that. Just,
Good place to be.
just sort of chilling like a villain, as Tory Hunter told you once.
Yes.
Yeah. But I believe that's going to bring it to a close here for our first Every Rocky Ever, covering an actual Rocky. Uh, this has been a fun one. It's fun to see your enthusiasm about these guys that you grew up watching, everything, because it was before my time and everything. But as we come to a close here, as always, you can find these stats and every other Rocky over on Every Rocky Ever on Twitter. You can also find me at sideline_crowd, and you can follow our podcast network at Rocky MTN Rooftop over on Twitter, as well as the Fans First Sports Network. And you can also find Dustin at Mr. T Spanish. But that's going to do it here for this episode. As always, thank you, and we hope to continue share your thoughts with us, your favorite memories as we share those on Twitter, and call in for those moments. See what you have to say about the Rockies and these memories you have of all your favorite players. And until next time, the Timmins brothers will be signing off. Until next time on Every Rocky Ever. Farewell.